All right, so I have a really long session. I'm probably likely going to run over. So, help me with time here, Constantine. I'm going to be showing you guys how to build a prototype from start to finish using Expression Blend. So I think it's going to be pretty exciting, but let's start with a little bit of background information before we go on Silverlight itself. So what is Silverlight? Silverlight's an application framework that you use to build Windows Phone experiences, one of two. There's also XNA. It's also used to build desktop experiences. It's a rich, interactive type experience builder. So it supports rich graphics, animations, transitions, media. It's very similar to Adobe Flash. For those of you who have used Adobe Flash, before I get started, how many of you have used Expression Blend in the audience? Okay, so there's a few. How many of you have used Adobe Flash? All right, so it's very similar. So it is an application framework. There are a series of tools that we have available to help you build your experiences for Silverlight. And one of which is Visual Studio. It's really targeted at the developer. It's optimized for coding. And then we have Expression Blend, which is really optimized for design tasks. So I think it would be most appropriate for those of us in the audience. And just quickly, I want to mention, it does only run on Windows, so that is something to keep in mind. But it does make it very easy to design really compelling experiences. So let's also now just take a quick look at Expression Blend and see what's available, some of the tools that you have to build your experiences before we start building our prototype. So I'm going to jump over to Expression Blend. I've just launched it and left it in the state after I launched it. And this is what you see as a user, as a designer creating application experiences. There's a nice start screen that shows the series of projects that you've previously created that you could open up and continue editing. And of course, you can create a new project. So let's just take a look at what we have here. As I mentioned, it produces experiences for both the desktop and Windows Phone. That's why you're seeing these nodes over here on the left for the project types, including just Silverlight and WPF. I have a little bit more and loaded into my particular version of Blend. If you use our SDK, you will just see the phone project templates. So let's focus in on those. Starting with this Windows Phone application template. So what this is, it's one of the many building blocks to help you really get started quickly to create your experiences. It's entirely empty for the most part. It just includes a couple of structural elements to help you position UI that you might want to incorporate into your experience. It's very easy to rip out, so it's a nice empty foundation for the most part on which to work. There is also a Windows Phone data-bound application template. And what this offers is it shows how to set up page navigation, and it also utilizes sample data. So it's showing you how to actually leverage sample data in your project. There is also, as we mentioned, the panorama and the pivot are some of the core application patterns you find in Windows Phone. So we do have two project templates directed at those types of experiences to help you get started. I also mentioned that Panorama has certain parameters that you really should adhere to create great experiences, such as only allowing it to represent itself in portrait mode. So these are default settings that you'll get when you use this particular project template, as well as hiding the system tray, just a couple of examples. There are more. There's also, the last one I'm going to mention, the Windows Phone control library. So this helps you create reusable components. It's kind of a nice starting point for that. That you might use throughout your application experience or experiences. Maybe you have a set of applications that you're designing for. The last thing that you see here is a Windows Phone SketchFlow application. This is available for download off of Codeplex. I've downloaded it, and I have SketchFlow, so that's why you're seeing it there. You won't get that by default if you, if you download the SDK. So let's go ahead, and I'm just going to create a base empty project so that we can take a look at some of the tools that are available in here as well. So there's a design surface, as you see here. This is the empty project. Like I said, there are a few elements that we have incorporated into this page. I'm going to focus over here on the Objects and Timeline tool window for a moment. These are the elements that are contained within this page. There is a grid. It's called Layout Root Grid. You're going to want this element in your projects. These other elements you can delete. I can select these items in the Objects and Timeline tool window and delete them if I so chose to do. There are also different views that you can take on this representation of your UI. There is a XAML view. I didn't mention this, but to create your Silverlight applications, there's a code behind layer, and then there's a XAML layer, which describes your user interface. You can also create resource dictionaries. I would equate it somewhat similar to creating it, like dealing with HTML and CSS. There is like code that you deal with. There's HTML, which is really for the UI layer, and then there's CSS that you can use to customize those experiences and design something more appropriate for your particular needs. There's also, and I oftentimes work in this view, there is a split view that allows you to view both the XAML and the design layer simultaneously. So in the Objects and Timeline tool window, you can interact both on the design surface and delete elements, or in the Objects and Timeline tool window. So I'm just going to show you some of the functionality to delete elements. I want to start with an empty canvas when I actually do start building my application, so that's why I'm deleting these things. There's a toolbox with some basic controls here. There is also an asset library in this little expander type control. What this does is show you all of the controls and application elements that you have available when you're building your experiences. I've also downloaded the Silverlight Toolkit, so it not only includes, it's not only displaying the SDK controls that I get by default, but the Silverlight Toolkit controls so that I can access them and start using them to build my experiences. Okay, what else? So there's also an Assets tab at the top here that I just brought into focus that shows basically the same information. Depending on your work style, you may want to work with the Assets tab, or you may want to actually use the tool window to interact with the assets information. Unique to Windows Phone is this Devices tab. Clearly, you need to be able to test your device with different orientations. So this tab allows you to do that. I can change my orientations, zoom out, change it back, zoom back in. I can also test the effects of theming on my experiences to make sure that my application is usable. If I'm choosing to leverage these things called theme resources that I alluded to earlier that allow the user's preferences in terms of background color choices and accent colors to appear in my application, I can test that here. So I can change, to see how my application responds. There's nothing here to the light theme. I could also test it, and you'll see this later, and see the effects of choosing a different accent color. We'll go much more in depth into this later. This is where you would be able to access the resource dictionaries that you've incorporated into your project. Again, we'll look at this more later. And then data. Data is absolutely essential to creating any experience, and there's a data tab that allows you to bring in sample data. So you can design around it. It's really hard to design unless you actually have the data available in which you need to actually build your experience on. So with this sample data, capabilities in Expression Blend, you can create sample data from one of your developer's classes. You could do it from XML, or you could create a sample data set, which we're going to do from scratch, and it's actually super fast and easy to do, as you'll see in a moment. So I think that's a good overview, and we'll get into the details here in a moment. So one other thing, it's a lot of information, and that printout that you guys, some of you might have, this actually, at a very high level, describes what I'm going to talk about so that you can follow along. I'll stop at each major chunk and see if you guys have questions, because I'm going to move fast. There's just no time. No time. OK, so let's take a look real quickly at what we're going to build for our prototype. So we're going to build a Windows Phone prototype using Expression Blend and Silverlight. This is what we're going to build. It is, imagine, a prototype for a weather application. It's very simple. I'm going to use a panorama, because I would eventually elaborate further and make it a much more in-depth experience. But for this particular prototype, it's going to have a 5-day weather forecast on the first panorama item. Then I'm going to have alert information for my current GPS. This is what I'm imagining. I'm not going to hook GPS up. Location. So these are the two panes that we're going to design and make this fully implement this, hopefully over the next hour, if I have an hour. So with that, let's jump in and start designing. I'm going to go back to the dark theme. I'm also going to. I'm going to move fast, maybe scan, what I'm going to do in each chunk. And like I said, I'm going to stop after I'm done, just to get a sense, and if you have any questions, maybe at the end of each chunk, ask me. I'm going to probably move too fast to try to follow along with. So let's make my tool windows a little smaller so I have more space to design. All right. So again, I think I mentioned this. The basic application structure or application pattern that I'm going to use for this experience is a panorama. I mentioned panoramas have several things that we recommend. One of which is, and I do work interchangeably between XAML and I didn't show the properties grid. I'll show it more in depth here in a moment. The property, and XAML, the design surface, and the properties grid. So I'm going to show you multiple ways of interacting with the tooling here. For panoramas, one of the things you're going to want to check is to make sure that you are only supporting portrait orientation. That is in the XAML. You could also select the node for your application, the top node. And then what I often do is go to the properties grid, and I'll type in sys, SYS, to, actually I don't want the system tray, I want supported orientations at this moment. Then I could see the property for supported orientations. I could change it there, but it's correct, or I could change it directly in the XAML. I also mentioned this, I want to make sure that the system tray isn't visible. I could change it directly in the XAML, or I could, again, use the property grid and type in sys, and then change the property from true to false. So now I'm getting closer to the basic structure of my application, in which I'm going to stick my panorama in now and start building out the experience. So I'm going to find the panorama control in my assets library. Here it is in the toolbox. If I select the layout root, that's kind of the root of your application structure, and you're going to want to work within that. I can double click on the panorama to add it to that design surface. I want it to fill all of the available space, so I can right click on it in the Objects and Timeline tool window or on the design surface and say auto size to fill, and it will fill all of the available space. I'm going to maximize the design surface now. The next thing I want to do, in order to help me work effectively, and I recommend this as well, I like to name things just so they make sense. So I'm going to call this bottom panorama item alerts pano. I'm going to call the grid, and I just simply click on it twice, not double click, but it's like a click and then a click. I'm going to call this alerts grid. Select my other panorama item. I'm going to call this weather pano, and weather grid. And the next thing I'm going to do is the title of my panorama doesn't say Weather Watch. That's what I want the title to be, is Weather Watch. So I'm just going to start by naming that. I could do it directly on the design surface, or I could select my panorama and go into the common properties. Actually, not the common properties, the text, not the text. Okay, I'm going to search for it. I'm going to search for title. And it shows me the property for the panorama title. I want to change that to Weather Watch. And now the title's changed. The next thing I want to do is I don't need a title. The information that I'm presenting in this prototype is really straightforward. I don't need a yes?
Question about uppercase and lowercase.
Yep. Your question would be?
Well, many of the apps are lowercase only.
They are. So that's like what we typically do in our native applications. You can design creatively. I mean, really, you don't have to follow everything prescriptively. I'm not doing that. You can break away. For instance, I mentioned the New York Times example, a great design of an application, if you go ahead and download it from the marketplace. They're using sans serif fonts. You never see sans serif fonts in our native application experiences. It's appropriate for them. I'm trying to show you some ways in which you can work with these tools. So this is just one example of where I'm going to break away from maybe what you typically see. Definitely a consideration, though. So the next thing I'm going to do is as I mentioned, I'm going to get rid of the title for each panorama item, or the header. So it is this header here. I'm just going to delete the property, and I'm going to do the same thing for my alerts panel. All right, so now I have, if you look at the first section, I've completed that section. Very basic. I am going to do one more thing. As you saw in my PowerPoint slide, I did a little bit of customization to that top font. I'm going to take things a little bit further, Thierry. And I'm actually going to show you how to go into XAML and customize the header information inline. So right now, it's the title of my panorama. I want that. I'm going to copy that XAML information, and I'm going to customize it. This is a little bit more complicated than you might want to work with initially. This is the only way to do this, unless you create some sort of custom style that you're going to consume. Title, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put inside of this parameter that I've created the text block. So I'm going to use a text block. I could drag and drop it into the XAML. For this particular case, I'm just going to show you how to type it in. Text equals, all caps, weather watch. Similar to HTML, I'm closing my tag, zooming out so you can see the effect. It hasn't changed anything yet. What I am going to do, though, is I'm going to go into the text properties here, and I'm going to start and mention these theme resources that are available for you to utilize. I'm going to utilize one of the theme resources. So these little boxes that you see behind some of these beside some of these properties, if you click on it, it exposes a menu of commands that you can interact with. So what I want to do is I want to use the system resource. This is the theme resources for, I want the phone font family semi-bold. So I'm going to select that. You saw the text jump up. So the next thing that I need to do to make sure it's readable is I need to go into the Layout tab, and I'm going to need to change the top margin. I'm going to try 30. First of all, I need to make it so I can type using my keypad. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. I'm going to make it 36 so that the panorama title is now bold and in view. All right, so now I'm going to move on. What I'm going to do now, unless anybody has any questions, is I'm going to create sample data that I can design around in my application. Okay. So I'm going to maximize the design surface. I'm going to go to the Data tab and create my sample data. I want 2 data sets. I could do 1, but I want 2. It just works better for me. I'm going to create one for my weather information and one for my alerts information. As I mentioned, so if you click on this tab, you can see the various ways you can create your sample data. You can create it from a class, you can create it from XML, or you can just generate the data on your own. It's actually very simple, as you'll see. I'm going to call this first sample data set weather data. I'm going to create one more. This one is going to be alert data. I want it available for the project, not just this document, and I did the same thing with my weather data. Okay, now they're just kind of stubbed out. Now I'm going to go in and customize the details for each of this data that I want to design around. So I'm going to start on the weather data set. Expand the node. I want 4 items. 2 are here by default, so I'm going to add 2 more so that I have 4 to work with. To do that, I go to my weather data and I click the plus icon twice. All right, try that again. On the collection, I do it. Click it twice. So I have 2 additional properties in which to work. So I want one of the items I want to be the description for the weather on the day. Another item I want to be, and I'm simply selecting and then pressing again, I want to be the day of the week. The next one, I want to be the high temperature. The next one, I want it to be the low temperature. The next thing I do is I want to customize the details for each sample data item. So for day, I want it to be a string. I want it to be textual information. Right now it's a Boolean, so it would render as a checkbox if I were to drop this data onto my design surface now. I want it to be text, so I'm going to select string. For the day of the week, I just want it to be 1 word. So I'm going to make the word count 1. Lorem ipsum is fine. It's going to generate the text for me automatically, which is pretty cool. For my description, I also want this to be a string. I want the word count to be 2. Actually, I want the word count to be 1 as well. Lorem ipsum, totally fine. Let it generate it for me. For the high and the low temperature, I could leave it as a string and customize everything. I'm going to make it a number. I want it to be a number. Makes sense for that type of data. The character length, I should make it 3. I'm just going to make it 2 for now because we could have 100-degree temperature days. It's different in Celsius, obviously. But I'm going to leave it as that. This is a prototype. Again, I want a number for the low temperature. I'm going to leave the length as 2 as well. Now I'm going to create the structure for my alerts data now. Kind of the same process. First of all, I'm going to name each item. I want a description, which is going to be the alert description information, the details for each alert. And I also want a title. For the description and the title both, I want them to be strings. For the description, I'm going to go with a lot of data. Let's say that we have some alert information that could be 100 words. So I'm going to make it 100 words. I'm going to max word length 8, totally fine. Stick with the defaults. For the title, I want it to also be a string, and I want the max word length to be 2. All right, so now I have the data looking somewhat like I need for my design experience, my design process that I'm doing right now. So I'm going to go ahead and incorporate that data onto the design surface, starting with the weather information. So to do that, I've selected the grid that is inside that weather panorama item. It's bringing it into focus on my design surface. And for some reason, this isn't auto-sizing to fill, so I'm going to auto-size to fill to have it fill the available space. Then I'm going to drag my weather data collection onto the design surface there. For this, I am going to auto-size to fill, if I can find the text for that. Let me stop for a moment. I'm wondering why my information is getting cut off. It's because when I deleted the information that came with the template, it was contained within a grid which had 2 rows. So what I need to do is I need to change the number of rows in the table, the layout root grid, so there's only 1. That's the problem that we're seeing right now. I could do it in the property grid, or I could do it just as quickly in XAML. And to get rid of the row definitions, I just simply select those row definitions and delete them. There's a very simple process in the property grid as well. So now, let's go ahead and go back to the full design surface. And now our information is displayed and it's filling up all of the available space. So let's do the same thing for our alerts information. Again, I'm going back over to the data tab and I'm going to drag and drop that collection I just created into the grid item that is in focus. Right click on it, say auto size to fill all of the available space. Now things are looking close to what I need to design things around, but I want to do a couple more tweaks. I actually want the data to be a little bit more representative of what I need to work with in real life. So you can do that in the design tab here. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to go into the collection for my weather data. Actually, let me bring that list box into focus. Go into the collection for my weather data by clicking on the tab because I want to edit the information that's generated for me. I want to customize it. I mentioned, first of all, I want a 5-day weather forecast. The number of records it's giving me by default is 10. I'm going to change it to 5. Now I have a 5-day weather forecast. The next thing I want to do is change the day of the week so it actually maps to real days. I'm going to say Monday, Tuesday, I'm just hitting return, Wednesday, return, Thursday, Friday. And I'm also going to change the weather description information so it's a little more meaningful and appropriate. Let's go with, here it's clear. Let's go with cloudy. One of these days it's got to be cloudy here, right? Cloudy and clear. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and leave it like that. I think that's workable and going to be a little bit more meaningful. As soon as I accepted those changes, the information in that list box updated. So let's just quickly do the same thing for the alerts data. For this, I just want 8 items in the number of records that I'm interacting with on the design surface. For the descriptions, again, I want that to be, it's 100 words right now. I'm going to go ahead and leave it as ipsum the lorem ipsum text, let it be 100 words, let them figure out how to, generate those characters. For the title, though, I think I'm going to make it a little bit more meaningful. Okay, these are alerts. Let's go with blizzard. Not that there would be a blizzard here. Again, I'm just trying to make it a little bit more realistic. I'm going to make every day a blizzard. Or how about high winds? What's that? Flooding. Do you guys have that? You do have flooding? Okay. Earthquakes.
There you go.
Oh, there you go.
Aftershock.
Earthquakes. Yeah, aftershock. How about that? Flooding. So you can customize it. It's kind of nice. Okay, this is a little tsunami. There could be those here. Tsunami. Okay. Blitzkrieg. All right. Okay, so now I have the data a little bit more meaningful, and we can design around it. So let's start actually. Okay, I'm going to stop and just, did all of that make sense? Does anybody have any questions about how to generate sample data? Yes, Thierry.
Just had a question. I noticed when you were creating the entries in the collection, you had typed description first, and then you typed day, and it alphabetized.
It
Can
did.
you control the order, or is it necessarily by alphabetical order?
I don't believe you can control the order. I think it does it alphabetically, automatically. I'm really not sure. So now I'm going to show you how to, again, so what happened when I dragged and dropped each collection into that grid for each, for the weather grid and the alerts grid, is it automatically generated a list box, and you can see that here in the Objects and Timeline tool window. And it is data bound to my sample data, and it's producing a base style for each row in the list that I can style for my particular needs. And it did that for both of them. So let's start with the weather information. So in Silverlight, all controls have a template describing how they look, and you can customize those templates. The list box has a template. That's what I'm interacting with right now. I could style the general appearance of that list box. I could draw a border around it. Of course, I don't want to do that. That wouldn't be appropriate for Windows Phone, and especially this particular scenario. So I'm not going to do that. There are other items associated with some controls. Buttons, very simple. It's just going to be the template, and you're just going to probably be interacting with that if you want to customize the style. For list box, there are these data templates that describe how each item in the list box is going to be rendered. There's also an item template for the container describing how that information is going to be rendered in terms of flow, whether it stacks vertically, runs horizontally, or wraps. So those are just a couple of examples. What I want to do now is I want to customize the data template that was generated for me. So that's in the Edit Additional Templates. That's why I'm going here. It's actually called Item Template. I call them data templates. I want to edit the one that was automatically generated for me. So I'm going to bring up split view so I can see both the XAML and the information that I'm designing. The next thing I'm going to do, again, I like to name things meaningfully so that I know what I'm interacting with, so I'm going to do that. This is the binding for each of these items. I'm just going to select it in the XAML and name each item in the Timeline tool window, Objects and Timeline tool window, to match. So I'm copying and pasting. Do that for all of them. Let's change that to description. You can change it either in the Objects and Timeline tool window, or you could do it here. Select the low, name the item. Okay, so now I have things named. I know what I'm working with because I'm going to move them around in the Objects and Timeline tool window. I want the description to be at the top of the list of items in this stack panel. So I'm going to simply select it and click and drag to move it to the top. Day as the next item is fine. I want the low temperature to come before the high temperature, so I'm going to reposition elements before I start designing. So the next thing I'm going to do is, I only showed you briefly what the target design for this prototype was like, but I want it to read horizontally low to high temperature with a little degree symbol, so I'm going to do that right now. To make it simple, I'm going to right-click after selecting both of those items and group them into a stack panel. If I go to the property grid, you'll see that the stack panel is orienting itself vertically. That's not what I want. I actually want it to orient horizontally. So I've changed the orientation. I'm going to expand that stack panel so I can see the high and the low temperature. Now I want to create the text for the slash. I want a slash symbol and 2-degree symbols. The text block for the low and the high, it's a text block for the low and the high temperature. I'm just going to duplicate that. I'm going to control, click, and drag, all probably shortcuts that we're familiar with when interacting with various programs. I'm going to draw a slash symbol, and it's changed it, which is fine. I'm going to change the binding for this slash symbol. It's the text value. I could actually do it over in that property window, which I'll do because this is probably the method that you would take when you're designing it, because it's very, it's definitely makes sense. You need to convert it to a local value, and then you can type directly in that text block. So I've entered the slash, and now it's a slash character. The next thing I want to do is I want to draw the little degree symbol. I want the text for that. I'm just going to use a lowercase o. I'm going to change the font size to a size of 10. And I'm going to duplicate that by control clicking and dragging so it sits beside the high temperature. So now I have the basics for my high and low temperature. I'm going to move a little bit quicker now. The next thing I want to do, I'm going to select both of these stack panels. I want them to, elements, the stack panel for the high and the low temperature and the day, and I'm going to group them into another stack panel. Group into a stack panel, and I'm going to do one more grouping. I'm going to leave that as vertical. One more grouping. Group into one more stack panel. This one I want to orient horizontally. When I created these stack panels, it set the width for me. I want it to auto size because I want it to fill all of the available space. So I'm going to go through and change all of the stack panels to make sure they're filling all of the available space. That's looking good. Day of the week, stack. Okay, so I'm looking good. So the next thing I want to do is I want to draw a little line beside the day and the high and the low temperature information. So there are some controls that you can use. I could use the line tool. I actually find it easier to use one of our container controls. It's this border control, which can draw different borders on all sides of something that is contained, that it contains. So I'm going to select the stack panel, double click to add that border control to my stack panel. It's move it up in terms of position because I want it to be to the left of that information. I'm going to change the width of it to 2. I want not 21, I want it to be 2, and the height to be 40. Then I'm going to change the appearance a bit. I only want the border to appear on the left, so I'm going to turn the border off on the right top and bottom. Next, I'm going to change the color. The default border brush color for this particular border is white, or black, opposite of what I said. I'm going to bind it to the system color for phone foreground color. This is the system color that allows this, it will allow this interface to respond to the system preferences that users are setting. So I'm binding it there. Let's go ahead and just, to ensure that we're responding to systems, the system settings properly, select all of the other textual elements that I've created, and I'm going to bind them to the phone foreground color also. So I'm going up to the brushes information, selecting color resources, and then selecting phone foreground color. So now they're bound. Okay. So the next thing I want to do, I'm going to style the description text. So it looks like I'm doing a lot, but this is kind of the process that you go through, when you're designing like these data templates. Even for prototypes, you want it to look good. You only do it one. You only do it to the one item, and then it replicates itself throughout the list. So it's not as cumbersome as it might seem. It's actually super powerful. So for this description information, I want it to bind to the phone accent color. I also want to change the font size. So if I go now to the text information, first of all, I want it to be the system resource for the font family to be semi-bold. So I'm going to change it to semi-bold. I think I'm going to try the largest font size, which is phone font size huge. That's a little too huge. So again, in order to customize the value, after having it bound to a system resource, I need to, I moved kind of quickly there. I need to use this convert to local value. And after doing that, I can directly type in here to customize the value. I'm going to make it 90. So I'm making it 90. Let's zoom in so we can see a bit more detail. The next thing I want to do is I want to push the day of the week, or the day of the week and the high and the low temperature a little bit over to the right. First of all, I'm going to align it horizontally, that entire group, by selecting the container stack panel to the left. Then I'm going to set the margin to 260 on the left so it moves over. Okay, now I'm going to do a bunch of really fast, like just positioning and tweaking of information. First of all, I'm going to select the high and the low temperature. I'm going to give it a -8 margin to move it a little bit tighter. Probably that's too tight. To the day of the week. I'm going to select my day of the week and make it a little bit bigger. I'm going to choose the system resource for phone font size large. Make it a little bit bigger. I'm going to select my border. I'm going to give it a little bit more padding between the text and the border itself. I'm going to make it 12, spacing things out. The next thing I want to do is move the block of information that's sitting beside that border up slightly. I'm going to give it a -12 top margin so it aligns just a little bit more precisely with that border. I would actually take more time if I were doing this, with the intention of actually, for instance, putting in a usability study, but I'm trying to move quickly. So the next thing I want to do is I'm going to move the day of the week and the high and the low temperature up a little bit tighter with the description information, again by setting a negative margin. Let's go down and look at cloudy. That's a bit too much because it's overlapping. I'll leave it like that. One thing I do need to do, though, because it's getting clipped at the edge, is I need to set the margin to 240 so that Wednesday isn't getting clipped. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. So we talked a lot about using grids to perfect the alignment of your elements. I'm going to bring a grid in. It's a PNG that you will have access to help me align things more precisely. So I'm going to right-click on my project. This is basically everything that's sitting inside of my project that I can interact with. I'm going to right-click on the project, not the solution node, the project node, and I'm going to say Add Existing Item. I have this grid on my desktop. It's called Grid. I'm going to select it, open it, and it's added to my project. So there's a breadcrumb bar when I drill into data templates that I can use to drill back out to the page that I'm actually designing. So I'm going to use that to get back to the list box. So now I'm back at the main page. I'm going to lock my panorama. One of the cool things about Blend is you can lock the elements that you're interacting with so you don't accidentally move them. So that's what I'm doing right now. Then I'm going to select my grid and just double-click to add it to my project. So now I have my grid in place. And now I can design to align things to this grid, and that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to unlock my panorama, select my weather grid, and I'm going to move it up a bit. How about -20? I want the baseline of this text to align with this grid row. So I'm just going to do a bit of finessing till it looks close to what I want. I'm getting there. I need to edit the data template items to get these subsequent items in the list to align properly. So I need to go back into the data template, item template, excuse me, for my list box. So I'm going to do that, edit current. And what I'm going to do is the topmost stack panel, I'm just going to adjust its margins, top and bottom. I think I'm going to give it a negative margin. That's a bit much. Actually, I think I'm going to make it 12. I made it a really big number, didn't I? All right, come on. -2. -2. -2 is looking good. All right, so if I zoom out, things look like they're aligning nicely. One last tweak. I want to fix the left alignment. We really have like a clear padding on the left and the right in our interfaces, so I'm going to make sure that this is not really interfering with that or overlapping it. So I'm going to set the left margin to 2 to kind of fix this problem that we're seeing. And since the character is rounded, it's actually, I think it's positioned correctly right now for something like a T. So I'm going to leave it as is. Again, I'm going to use the breadcrumb to step out of this item template and back to the main page. I'm hitting Control-0 to zoom out so that we can see the current status of our design, and things are really aligned well now. Okay, I'm going to do super fast the same 5 minutes. Oh my goodness. Seriously? Oh my goodness. Okay. Wow. So actually, I'm going to skip this. Okay, we're not going to have a pretty alerts information. I was going to add a wrap panel and use the toolkit. What I am going to do is I'm going to add a page. Wow. Shoot. So I'm going to add a page. So what I was planning to do is, with the alerts information, allow users to click on an item in the alerts information to see the full details for that particular alert. And then what I'm going to do now, I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then I'm going to hook up the Silverlight Toolkit animations to show you how you can leverage those. So I should be able to move fairly quickly through that. So first of all, I'm selecting the project node again. I'm going to add a new item this time. I want a Windows Phone page. I'm going to name it Alerts Details, XAML. And Control-0 to zoom out. I'm going to do a little bit of data binding here. I'm going to call this Alerts Details, no data binding here. I'm going to select this text, though, the page title. And actually, I'm going to leave it as is. I could do some data binding directly on this information, but I'm going to go ahead and leave it as is. I am going to create a content area down below by clicking and dragging the page title information. I'm going to call this content, and I'm going to set the word wrap on this text block. The wrap to wrap, and I'm going to do a bit of data binding just because I want to see the 100 words that we're kind of counting on. So I'm going to bind this to my alert data collection, not the title, I want the description. So now I have a whole bunch of text. It needs to be a little bit smaller. I'm going to bind to the theme resource for normal. And I'm also going to leverage some of the other resources. Not only do we have fonts and colors and sizes for elements, but we also have margins. So I'm going to use the phone margin to help me align things properly. Okay, so now I have the page. Now I need to hook up navigation for this page. Blend has this great functionality I think designers will really like. These behaviors, which I have in focus over here. Let's make this a little bit bigger. Are essentially encapsulated code chunks that you can drag and drop onto your design surface and take advantage of, and they'll do certain functionality, such as page navigation or controlling a storyboard. Whether it's on press of a button or on loading of a page, there are various permutations, and developers you can create your own for your particular needs. So there is a navigate to page. Let's go to mainpage.xaml. We've created our alert details page. On our alert list box, which looks terrible, we want it so that you can click on an individual item in this list box and it will navigate to the details page and show you the details. So to do that, I can utilize the default property or default behavior that comes with Blend. What this does, though, is it will invoke navigation as soon as I click on the list box, not the line item. So I've created a custom behavior. And I'm going to use that. So I'm going to delete that behavior that comes by default. There are some very interesting ones you're going to want to check out. And I'm going to add the one that I've created to handle page navigation and data binding. So I'm going to add existing. And my behavior is this page navigation. To take advantage of it, I need to build. So my build has started. It's succeeded. Go back to the behaviors tab, and my page navigation behavior is now available, and I can drag and drop it onto my alerts list box. All right, so now all I need to do is set the property to tell it what to navigate to when an item in the list is clicked on. How about my alerts details that I just created? So I've set up page navigation. I can run my project, and we can see And then very quickly, I'll show you how you can leverage some of the toolkit animations. There is a bit that you're going to have to do to take advantage of the toolkit animations, but it is really powerful. So default project, splash screen, and I actually need to delete this grid. Run it one more time. Build started. All right, so when I click on one of these items, it navigates me to my page, but I don't have those nice transitions. So I'm going to quickly show you how to add those transitions using the toolkit. All right, so I'm going to hit F4 to go back to the F6, actually, to go back to the layout that I had previously. You can change the layout of your tool windows using the F4 and F6 keys. Okay, so to use the toolkit, I need to have a reference to the toolkit in my project. I don't have that yet, so I need to add a reference. In Blend, it's actually surprisingly more difficult than it is in Visual Studio. I need to navigate to the DLL for the Silverlight toolkit. So if I go to my computer, I'm going to choose Program Files. I want the Windows Phone SDK. That's where, or the Microsoft SDK, sorry, Microsoft SDK. I want Windows Phone 7.1 toolkit, August 11 toolkit, and there's this Windows Phone Controls toolkit DLL. That's what I want. Double click on it. Now I have to build again before I can make use of it. So if I go to Project, Build succeeded. Now I can access the controls that are available in the toolkit. Not only are there animations, but there are a variety of other really interesting controls, such as progress indicators. So you're definitely going to want to check it out. Okay, so to take advantage of it, you actually need to do a little bit of coding. I will provide details for you later. You need to go into mainpage.xaml, not mainpage.xaml.cs, app.xaml.cs. And down at the bottom, there's this root frame. That basically contains the information that's displayed in your application. We need to change this from phone application frame to transition frame, which is part of the toolkit, and save that change. Step back out. The next thing that I need to do is I need to go to mainpage.xaml. Let's close mainpage.xaml CS. I'm in mainpage.xaml, and I need to add a reference to the toolkit. The easiest way to do that, I'm trying to move this over. The easiest way to do that is to drag a toolkit control into your design surface, such as the wrap panel, and I'll show you why in a moment. So I've added it. I don't need it. I'm going to delete it. You have to have a namespace reference to the toolkit in your application to leverage the toolkit. So somewhere here, is the reference to the toolkit. And by dragging and dropping a control on here, it does this for me automatically. So that's how I recommend adding the reference to the toolkit. So the next thing you want to do is utilize this resource dictionary that I've created, which has styles for page transitions. I'll make this available. You could actually enter the XAML directly. I recommend just restyling your page. I mentioned how all controls can be restyled by editing its template. All right, let's try that one more time. What is going on here? Phone application page, this is what I want. Let's try it here. All right, I have a problem and I'm not sure what is going on. But we are running out of time. There was so much more that I wanted to cover. So am I like pretty much totally out of time, like 5 more minutes? All right. Let me try this one more time. I'm not sure what is going on, why I can't edit my templates. So I've introduced some sort of problem. Normally you would edit the template for your page. Let's try just once more. And you would be able to access this command for edit template. Well, let me actually do one more thing. I'm going to add my resource dictionary. Maybe that has something to do with it because I haven't added it yet. That actually is it. So I'm not going to edit template, and I apologize for that. So what I want to do is apply the style that I've created previously for pages, and I'm going to use this slide style. So now I have the slide style in place. I need to do it on all pages that are going to incorporate that transition. So the next thing that I would need to do is go to my alert details, and again, this doesn't have the namespace reference, so select our wrap panel, add it to the surface, delete it so it automatically generates that reference to the namespace for us. Right-click on the top node for the page and edit the template, apply the resource for the slide page transition. All right, this will work, guaranteed. I'm building my project one more time. And since you said I had like 5 minutes, I'm going to take 2 minutes just to show how you would create custom animations. So we're seeing the slide transition incorporated now by referencing the information in the toolkit. So one last thing, I wanted to create a custom opening animation where Weather Watch would slide out. The place that you'll do this to create your custom animations that you're going to want to trigger, you're going to go to the Objects and Timeline tool window, click on the plus button that you see here, create a new storyboard. I would have called it Open. And then you have a design surface on which to design your custom animations. So with this, you can create keyframes. So maybe I have a keyframe here for my layout route. This is not an animation that you're going to want to do in reality. So I create a keyframe for maybe the beginning of my animation, what I expect it to look like at the beginning of the animation. Then I'll create a keyframe in this particular scenario for how I want it to appear at the end of my animation. And then what I do is I move the elements to how I want them to appear at the end of the animation. It's a really bad example. And I can preview my work using these controls that you see up here. So I can preview what the animation is going to look like using these controls. I also mentioned, I think I mentioned this, that we have easing effects or easing functions that you can actually leverage to make animations feel a little bit more lively and exciting. And so I'll show you how you would do that as well, just super quickly. So let's say that I wanted it to, this animation to start out slow and then kind of end quickly. So what I would do is select, let me change this animation quickly. Let's let it start there. I need to do a little bit of tweaking because I animated something that I didn't intend to animate. Move this a little bit more. All right, let's try this again. So you select the ending keyframe that you created. You could do the beginning keyframe as well. And if you go to the property grid, you'll see that there are a series of easing functions that you can use to make the animation a little bit more lively. There are bouncing, easing functions, probably not something that you want to use in Windows Phone. I mentioned maybe this slow to fast type transition. So if we go back to the beginning, we can check out the effects of applying this easing function. Let me delete this animation for the phone application so that we can take a look at it a little bit better. So as you can see, it kind of made it slow at the beginning and then snappier at the end. Some of the animation capabilities that I was going to go into, I think I'm probably going to have to stop. There's a lot more that I could show people maybe one-on-one if you're interested in learning a little bit more. Does anybody have any questions with what they've seen so far or anything that you might want to go into one-on-one? Yes?
So, well, this is actually sort of for Brian. So this one goes to Brian.
Okay.
So this looks very easy to handle, making the UIs. So why would you want to even do this on Photoshop first and then do the same, write all the, or put all the lowercases, etc.
to be quite honest, the way that I work when I'm designing an application, I always start just on with pen and paper. I don't use Visio, I don't use PowerPoint, it's pen and paper, because I can scratch things out and throw them away. I just feel like I can move more quickly. That's the way that I like to work. Then I do oftentimes, depending on the situation, I'll go to Photoshop. Or there's this tool called Expression Design, very similar to Illustrator, depending on what I'm doing. If I'm creating some sort of intricate vector art, I'm going to do that in Expression Design. And I use Expression Design instead of Illustrator because it's one of the tools that's part of the Expression suite. I could just as easily use Illustrator. It just depends on how you prefer to work. You can do everything in here, absolutely. One of the other really great bits of functionality is that you can import Adobe Illustrator assets directly into Blend. So you can work how you would normally, naturally, and then bring all of those assets directly into here. Same with Photoshop. So I have a really simple Photoshop file with a bunch of layers. It's bubbles, just to show you an example of how it pulls in the layers. It would actually pull in text information as well. Like if I had text layers, I don't in this example. It would rasterize it, something to keep in mind. But you can pull it in to Blend and then interact with it and utilize it in I'm in an animation right now. I need to get out of the animation before I can do that. So let's try that one more time. So I'm going to pull in my Photoshop file. So here are my bubbles, and where did my bubbles go? Here, logos. So it brings in all of the elements that were in my Photoshop file, and then I can manipulate them. Again, I think it's a workflow thing. Whatever you're most comfortable with, you certainly can do it all in here.
But that was sort of related to my next question,
Okay.
which was, can you link assets? That if I'm doing the actual visual design using this tool, can I link the background and work on it in Photoshop and it will automatically appear on the change will appear here?
Yeah, so you actually could do that. So I could, okay, maybe not with the layered file. I actually haven't tested that, so I can't answer that question authoritatively. I haven't tried that. If I had some sort of flattened image that I was working with, then I could certainly do that. I could work directly from the project, pull, and bring that image into Photoshop. I don't know if you saw when I was working, I accidentally clicked on something that is a Photoshop image essentially, and it opened Photoshop. So it will allow you to do that. I can't, I'll find you an answer as to whether, if you bring in a layered object, if you can still manipulate the layers in Photoshop and then have it automatically represented in Blend. I'll find out. Oh, a little bit more on that. I kind of, I showed you a little bit about the toolkit animations. We do have some animations that you can quickly, take advantage of. There's the turnstile transition. There's the slide transition. There's the swivel transition. There are a series of transitions and animations that you can leverage. There really isn't a lot of customization that you can do to them when you're using the toolkit. As Brian said, you would actually have to code it, if you want to yourself to do deep customizations. Or you could create animations, here in the actual animation tooling, custom animation tooling that we have for your particular needs. It wouldn't easily be, usable on a variety of controls. It's like you would have to create custom animations per control. So we do have something. It is a little bit limited. Yeah, exactly. So I mean, it'd be, if create something, be awesome. Seriously, create some great animations and share them. I think huge opportunity there. Yeah. Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you.